Okay, I'm about to make the absolutely absurd claim that punting a football with a spiral is one of the hardest, if not the hardest thing to do in all of sports. Now, at an initial glance, you may immediately laugh me off and think, what is this guy talking about? He's already lost his marbles. But I intend to justify this claim across a few different axes, with the axis being movement, precision, operation, and lastly consequence, and argue that across these spectrums no other action in any other sport will rank as high, or at least you can tell me about what niche sport has a comparable ranking. Okay, but to begin, let's lay down one rule, which is that we're talking about the act of kicking a spiral to the absolute best of our ability and pushing the human limit. You may think, okay, that's obvious, but I can guarantee you that there are going to be people talking about how easy it is because they punted in high school or maybe even college and it wasn't that hard. And if you want me to be blunt, it's likely not hard because you weren't very good. By having poor form or poor understanding of what you're doing, anything, and I mean anything, can be easy. I can step on a golf course right now and in 3 to 4 hours get the ball into every single hole and chuckle to myself about how easy it was by simply not acknowledging everything that makes golf complex. The same could be said for art, it can be said for literally everything, so let's nip that conversation in the butt and ascertain that just because you can do a very rudimentary version of something does not make it easy. But one thing I notice a lot of guys are doing wrong is self-grooming and self-care. Just going out looking scraggly and scruffy. So that's why I'm glad to tell you about today's sponsor, Manscaped. Now, I've been using Manscaped products for my personal care for a little bit now, but they have busted out just an absolute game changer. It is called the Chairman Plus. Not only is it going to get you a super clean shave in just minutes, but it has 2 interchangeable blade heads to get you that smooth skin close shave and the ability to customize your look. It also has flex adjust technology, so it adapts to your face to get those hard to reach spots. And do you hate getting nicked by razors? Well, guess what? It also has skin safe technology to significantly reduce cuts, razor burns, and ingrown hairs. And is looking good in a timely manner simply not enough for you? Well, I'll do you one better. It's also waterproof, so keeping it clean is a completely non-issue. Whether you're looking for a gift for a man in your life or something for yourself, you literally cannot go wrong with the Chairman Plus. And for the piece de resistance, if you go to manscaped.com and use promo code IsaacPuns, you can get 20% off and free international shipping. You heard that right. Isaac Punts get you 20% off and free shipping. So ditch your old shaving routine and get with Manscaped. Now, on to the movement of a punt, because it's something that I don't think people respect for being as complicated as it actually is. From just a fundamental level, the way that you get optimal power out of a punt requires you to be in sort of this out of balance leaned back position. This way your hips can be aimed up, so when you contact the ball, your leg swing is swinging up to rocket it off your foot at the optimal height and distance. The isolated movement alone is hard to even practice, as it's not a position you can static hold since you're off balance, meaning that even going through the motion of practicing this isolated movement, you either have to take a concession with the form, which to beginners usually creates a chain reaction of problems with their training that will go on later on, or be forced to learn a no step, which is something who, from my perspective, being a guy who's coached a lot of punters, is an incredibly unintuitive movement to learn. Or finally is to give up on truly isolating the movement and jump right into the second most complicated part, which is the actual steps leading up to the punt. The thing about the steps is that while walking in a straight line and looking at a ball may seem pretty easy, in a perfect world that ball is slightly offset to your right or to your kicking side, so it's not the easiest thing to do. When you tack on the layers of controlling how long you're stepping to about 3.5 yards or less, or trying to build up momentum in just 2 to 2.5 steps, and throw in that you're trying to stabilize and hold on to a football during this whole thing while creating momentum with your shoulders that does the opposite of what your lower body is trying to do, it is an incredibly unintuitive movement, because instead of opening up your shoulders, you're trying to keep them down through your first step, so that way you can get into your plant foot and sort of hang clean the ball, but with a single leg. Now, I've just thrown a lot of information at you guys, which is all pretty much just to let you know how complicated of a movement it is. It's why our dedication to doing this movement has taken so long to produce fruitful rewards, as we've been doing it for over 100 years now, and only in the last 2 decades have really truly made huge strides in the movement. But it's also why guys like myself get so excited to see some good punts, because when it's done at a high level, it's just a miracle every single time. But the question is, how hard is this compared to other movements? Intuitively, the movement of punting gets compared to the most is something like Olympic lifting, hang clean, or power cleans, because it uses many of the same muscles and requires a high degree of technique to optimize both of them. I would also say it's comparable to something like hitting a golf ball, although the act of dropping and hitting it on top of the movement itself adds a second degree of difficulty, or maybe you could even compare it to a pole vault as far as a complicated movement needing immense focus and precision with a rather rough consequence for failure. And I'm not going to argue about which movement itself is harder, although I do think that when it comes to punting a football, it's one of the few amongst all sports where you get to a high level and see people who have truly still not mastered the fundamentals of the movement. But what I will say is that none of these other sports that require this level of complexity in movement is taking place anywhere near the degree of difficulty of other factors, like being in the middle of another play or the time constraints, or pretty much any of the other things that we're about to be talking about. But let's move on to the second aspect, precision. Because on top of the movement being particularly hard, there is also an incredibly deep level of precision that goes into it. I mean, every little part of the punt is a finely tuned machine. If your steps aren't directly towards the target, that ball is going anywhere but where you're trying to make it go. If your drop isn't perfectly aligned with the sweet spot of your foot, it's going to be a suboptimal hit, which greatly deviates the outcome. And then, of course, the hardest part is connecting your foot to the ball. So once you get past the barrier of simply stepping and dropping the ball consistently, which from what I've seen takes on average a minimum of 7 years to be able to do that in a game, you get to deal with making contact with the ball, which is an extremely tiny spot to get for optimal pop. You see, contacting a little bit too high or a little bit too towards the nose drastically reduces the force coming off your foot due to a worse distribution of force as you get narrower on the ball. But to talk more about this, you have to go to IRL Isaac.
Hi guys, in real life Isaac here. So what I'm going to be doing to prove just how tight these margins are is I'm going to be hitting 2 balls, okay? Both of them are going to be aiming at that chair back there, which is about 45 yards away on a punt. And all I'm going to do is put chalk on my foot to show where I'm making contact with the ball, just to show the tiny margin of error. So we got 4 pretty different flight paths. Now let's take a look at where that hit on my foot. Okay, to the untrained eye, these might almost all look identical, but you can tell, that there is some deviation. So this one right here is the worst one, and we can see it's pretty far away from my usual contact spot. It's a little bit too steep on the ball, and it's a little bit far, usually my contact. So this is the good one, for those who can't tell. I got really nice placement over it, really clean hit. This one right here was, a little bit higher, not as good, and you can see all that the difference is my foot's about, what's the difference there? Less than an inch to the inside is this one. And this one was even closer, it's a pretty decent hit, but not great. And that's right there is about a ½ an inch from the perfect contact spot, which is right here. So it just takes a very little amounts of deviancy to create such drastic differences in ball flight. And then of course, if we get anything that looks like large deviance, we get some crazy ball flights like on this one.
Thank you, IRL Isaac. But the sheer precision of making contact with the ball, compounded with the difficulty of the movement up to the contact spot and how precise you have to be with said movement to ensure good contact, makes it a uniquely challenging thing to do, and why it's compared to golfing so often, as that's really one of the only things as precise and as difficult to do in sports. There is one other caveat, which I know people are going to compare it to, okay, and that is hitting a fastball or curveball, or really any sort of things. Now, I could go on about hitting a fastball isn't necessarily precise by the definition that I'm using, in the sense that if you assume a batter knew exactly where the ball was going to be, say like in a home run derby, they're literally just going to rattle off hits. The complexity of baseball comes from the battle between pitcher and batter and winning the mental game and being able to predict where the ball is going to break and so on and so forth. And it's really an insanely hard thing to do at the highest level. But every sport is an insanely hard thing to do at the highest level. So then it becomes more about which sport is truly harder and not which movement or action inside of a sport is inherently hard, because swinging a baseball bat would be more of what I'm comparing it to as opposed to hitting a fastball, which is also why I'm not comparing it to like reading a defense or the physical complications of wrestling, because those are all the mental aspects that really define the sport instead of a specific movement. But all of this that I've talked about is still before we even get to some of the hardest stuff that comes to punting. And next up on the docket, operation. So when I say operation, I mean one thing: what it takes to perform the movement with this precision live. So if you just had a long snapper throw you the ball, take a few seconds to catch it and kick it, perhaps we would be further along with punting than we currently are. But one of the greatest challenges we have isn't just performing this movement in a bubble like almost everything else that has this level of difficulty of movement and precision. But to start any operation, hurdle number one is you have to catch the snap. Now, this is not a nice soft little lollipop throw you're going to get from your dad when you're first learning how to catch. Maybe in high school it is like that, but in high level, college, and pros, this ball is sometimes moving 40 miles an hour across 15 yards, which is what it would take that snap to get back to you in 0.75 seconds. And I'll give you a hint, some guys even throw it faster. But unlike every other position whose sole job is to catch it, the punter is actively getting ready to adjust to the laces as soon as it hits their hand, and it happens so fast most people don't even realize it's happening live because of how quick we've been moving at it. Not only is simply fielding the snap hard enough, but there's another layer that's just as difficult, because long snappers, as good as they have been, are not always directly on target. So sometimes you're going to get an off-target snap, requiring a punter to not only adjust for the lace spin, but now has to adjust the ball back to its perfect position, up, down, left, and right, into the tiny little spot that we need it to be. And God forbid they pull us too far left or right and we have to adjust our feet. So now you're thinking of a full body reset to get back into this position. And the piece de resistance is we have to do all this adjusting and get the ball off our foot in about 1.35 seconds, and a lot of times faster than that. And if you need to know how long that is, that's up on screen right now. You also have to couple in with the fact that we have to cover less than 4 yards, which is not an easy thing to keep track of. And the whole part of the operation is that it's so not natural for a punter that if you let them just go and kick by themselves, that's almost the first two things that they're going to completely lose when unsupervised. Now, while pros make this seem like a non-issue, almost every single mishit, bad hit, or shank is because something went slightly awry during this process. With the margins being so slim, most people won't even notice it. I mean, if we're adjusting to a high or low snap, it can have lingering effects just because our weight distribution on our feet is different. And even if you feel like any other movement can match the punt in complexity and precision, anything that comes close to this level happens in a bubble with pretty much no other variables, while having to get a punt off in the middle of a war zone with a nail in the coffin, in my opinion. The lingering part over this whole argument being the consequence, the final thing that really sets this whole thing apart. Because while I already can't think of anything this technically advanced forced to perform under such time constraints without the sole object of the competition being performing a complex task under a time constraint, there's one final measure to ensure that the degree of difficulty is unlike almost anything else, and that is what happens when you fail. Now, you may think I'm talking about a shanked punt or giving up bad field position, which, I mean, trust me, no punter wants a ass chewing on a sideline for failure, but that's not actually what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the failure to operate at the right pace, because that's not easy if I haven't told you enough about that. But the failure to do that is getting folded in half. That's right, not only are you having to get this ball off as fast as you can, but I have seen legs get snapped like twigs. I've seen punters get concussed. Hell, I've taken a few nasty hits of my own. And the worst part is you don't even have to be moving so slow. Someone can miss a block and next thing you know, your punt is getting volleyball spiked while you're getting flipped. And for those who haven't put it together, that still doesn't feel good even if we're not injured. In fact, the first and biggest hurdle for most punters is getting over that fear of their patellar tendon being treated like a punching bag for an opposite punt blocker. So in short, you are performing an incredibly complex movement that's coupled with you having to be insanely precise across all aspects of that movement, where everything in your operation is working against you performing optimally. And if you're too slow, or sometimes not, you might just get folded like a soft taco on Cinco de Mayo. This is why NFL punters you meet are so strange. They have the mentality of golfers with a fried nervous system and an addiction to adrenaline, but you may ask yourself, Isaac, if this is so hard, how does anyone ever succeed at this position?
That's the neat thing. you don't.
Punters have sort of a Sisyphus dilemma, where we are not really sure if the perfect punt is even achievable under the constraints of an NFL football game. Can we truly achieve max power in 1.3 seconds and 3.5 yards? It's something that doesn't really feel possible, while at the same time not feeling impossible either, leading to us constantly rolling that rock up the mountain. Most punters have pretty much accepted the fact that in-game, you're never going to hit your perfect punt, leading to this strange phenomenon of a theoretical best punt and an actual best punt having an incredible size gap. I mean, punter Michael Turk in practice has hit an 85-yard punt past line of scrimmage, aka goal line to goal line. I've seen Ethan Evans routinely hit 5.8 seconds of hang time. 3 separate punters have broken a theoretical hang time barrier of 6 seconds, being Tyler Newsome, Tommy Townsend, and Drew Kaiser. But in a game, on the fly, the longest punt in the season is typically around 65 yards, with anything past that requiring a sizable roll, and the best hang times usually hang in from 5.3 to 5.4 range, a full 0.3 seconds lower than what most of the best punters are capable of, just because it's so damn hard. I mean, AJ Cole, the league's best punter, has pretty much made a name out of not even trying for theoretical best punts in practice, focusing all his energy on what's the best game punt he can hit at the highest consistency. But now you might be wondering, what is the best punt by the numbers ever hit in a game? And no, it's none of the old 90-yard punts that required 30+ yards of roll. From what I've seen, the most impressive punt comes from punter Tommy Townsend. 4 minutes left in this half, ball at the 33-yard line, everything is perfect. The snap comes back at chest height, normally a hair higher than what punters wanted, but this time it might have been perfect to just keep Tommy Townsend a little bit more upright. As he keeps his drop high, his hands are perfect, there's not a single error in that front, laces exactly where he wants, and incredibly fast, with his steps being nothing but exceptional. First step at the 19, last step at the 22, exactly 3 yards in 1.11 seconds. Faster than he needed to go, but with more speed comes more momentum. So with a high drop being as perfect as it is, Tommy having the best form in the league and more than enough momentum to do it with a slight tailwind, he absolutely explodes the ball. 66 yards on the fly, 5.71 seconds of hang time, a league record, and with damn good distance too. It bounces in for the touchback, so the reaction the announcers give is this.
The bounce into the end zone.
Pretty much nothing. The best punt in recorded NFL history just by sheer stats, and it was beautiful, no notes, and it's still not even close to the biggest punt ever recorded by a punter in practice, which is why punting might just be one of the hardest things to do in any sport.